My name is Nora Franklin. I thought I'd seen the worst life had to offer. I was wrong. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The house in Westchester County had been my prison for the past 2 years. A sprawling colonial that once belonged to my late husband's family, now occupied by my eldest son, Andrew, and his wife, Matilda. They'd moved in after Gerald died, claiming they needed to help me through the transition. What they really needed was free childcare for their twin boys and someone to maintain their lifestyle while they climbed their respective corporate ladders. I should have seen the signs earlier. The way Matilda would introduce me to her friends as Andrew's mother who lives with us, never mentioning that this was my house, inherited from my husband's estate. The way Andrew would ask me to tidy up before his colleagues came over, as if I were staff, rather than the woman who'd mortgaged her future to pay for his MBA. The way they'd discuss household expenses in front of me, debating whether to keep me on, as if I were an employee whose contract was up for renewal. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed because I thought family meant something. Because I believed that love, even unreciprocated love, had value. Because I was still clinging to the fantasy that my children would eventually recognize my sacrifices and treat me with the respect I'd earned. The morning of Andrew's 32nd birthday dawned gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I'd been up since 5 a.m., preparing food for his party, homemade lasagna, garlic bread, chocolate cake from scratch. Matilda had insisted on a casual gathering for Andrew's work colleagues, but casual in their world meant I'd be spending the day in the kitchen while she took credit for everything. "Mom, don't forget the house needs to look perfect," Andrew said over coffee, barely glancing up from his phone. "Mr. Harrison is coming. He's the senior partner I've been trying to impress. This could make or break my promotion." I nodded, swallowing the bitter taste in my mouth. "Of course, sweetheart. Everything will be ready." Matilda swept into the kitchen wearing a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Nora, I've laid out some cleaning supplies in the hall closet. The baseboards in the living room look dusty, and there are fingerprints on the French doors. Oh, and please make sure you're discreet tonight. Andrew's colleagues don't need to know about our living situation." Discreet. As if my presence in my own home was somehow shameful. I spent the morning cleaning rooms that were already spotless, preparing food I wouldn't be invited to eat with the guests, and listening to Matilda bark orders like I was her personal servant. Andrew disappeared to the office, leaving me to transform our home into the perfect backdrop for his professional theater. By 6 p.m., the house gleamed. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier Gerald had bought for our 20th anniversary. The dining room table, set with my grandmother's china, looked like something from a magazine. The scent of fresh flowers, which I'd driven 20 minutes to buy with my own money, filled the air. The guests began arriving around 7. I watched from the kitchen window as expensive cars pulled into the circular drive, disgorging men in perfectly tailored suits and women dripping in jewelry that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the past 5 years. These were Andrew's people now, the world he'd entered when he'd decided his mother's working-class background was something to hide rather than honor. I stayed in the kitchen, plating appetizers and refilling wine glasses that Matilda would carry out as if she'd prepared everything herself. Through the serving window, I could see Andrew holding court in the living room, animated and confident as he told stories about his latest victories in corporate law. He looked so much like his father at that age, before life wore Gerald down, before the drinking started, before the heart attack claimed him at 59. "Nora," Matilda's voice cut through my thoughts. "We need more of those little quiche things, and the wine is running low." I nodded and returned to my tasks, invisible and efficient. This was my role now, the ghost in the machine, keeping everything running smoothly while others took the credit and the glory. Around 9 p.m., a man I didn't recognize approached the kitchen. He was older than most of the other guests, probably in his late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cultured but warm. "I'm looking for the restroom." "Down the hall, second door on the right," I replied, not looking up from the dishes I was washing. He didn't move immediately. "You know, I have to say this is exceptional food. Did Matilda make all of this herself? Something in his tone made me glance up. There was a knowing quality to his question, as if he already suspected the answer. "No," I said quietly. "I did." He nodded slowly. "I thought so. She doesn't strike me as someone who knows her way around a kitchen. I'm Joseph Harrison, by the way." My hands stilled in the soapy water. This was Andrew's boss, the senior partner who could make or break his career. And here I was, meeting him while wearing an apron and cleaning up after a party I hadn't been invited to attend. "Nora Franklin," I said, drying my hands on a dish towel. "Andrew's mother." "Ah." His expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful. "I see. Well, Mrs. Franklin, you should know that your cooking puts most restaurants to shame. Andrew is lucky to have such talent in the family." Before I could respond, Andrew's voice boomed from the living room. "Mr. Harrison, there you are. I was just telling everyone about the case we won last month." Mr. Harrison glanced toward the living room, then back at me. "It was lovely meeting you, Mrs. Franklin. I have a feeling we'll speak again soon." He left me standing there, confused by the cryptic comment but too tired to dwell on it. The party was winding down, and I had hours of cleanup ahead of me. It was nearly midnight when the last guest finally left. Matilda had disappeared upstairs, claiming exhaustion, leaving me to restore the house to its usual pristine state. Andrew lingered in the living room, loosening his tie and pouring himself a generous glass of whiskey. "Good party," he said, not looking at me as I collected empty glasses. "I think Mr. Harrison was impressed." "That's nice," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. He took a long sip of his drink. "You know, Mom, Matilda and I have been talking about the future, about our plans." Something in his tone made me stop what I was doing. "What kind of plans?" "Well, the boys are getting older. They'll be starting school soon, and we won't need as much help around the house." He still wasn't looking at me. "We've been thinking it might be time for you to find your own place. Get back out there, start living your own life again." The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, they were planning to discard me like yesterday's newspaper. "This is my house, Andrew," I said quietly. "Actually, it's not." His voice was matter-of-fact, almost casual. "Dad left it to me in the will. You have a life estate, but that doesn't mean you have to use it. We think it would be better for everyone if you found somewhere more suitable, somewhere smaller, more manageable for someone your age." I stared at him, this stranger wearing my son's face, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The love I'd carried for him, the hope I'd nurtured despite years of neglect and casual cruelty, began to crystallize into something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "I see," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He finally looked at me then, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. As if some part of him recognized that he'd just crossed a line there was no coming back from. But it was too late. The damage was done, and the woman who'd spent decades putting everyone else's needs before her own was finally, irrevocably, dead. The next morning brought no apologies, no acknowledgement of the previous night's conversation. Andrew left for work early, whistling as he straightened his tie in the hallway mirror. Matilda emerged from her bedroom in yoga clothes, already on her phone scheduling her daily massage and lunch date with friends I'd never been introduced to. "Nora, I'm meeting clients for brunch," she announced without looking up from her screen. "The boys need to be at soccer practice by 10. Don't forget Luke's inhaler. It's in the medicine cabinet." I nodded, watching her grab her keys and designer purse. No please. No thank you. No acknowledgement that I'd spent the previous evening as their unpaid servant while they entertained guests in my own home. After she left, I sat in the kitchen with my coffee, staring out at the garden Gerald and I had planted together 20 years ago. The roses he'd given me for our anniversary were blooming, deep red petals that reminded me of blood in the morning light. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but something fundamental had shifted. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I was seeing my life with brutal clarity for the first time in years. I wasn't a beloved mother being cared for by grateful children. I was free labor, a convenience, a woman whose sacrifices had been forgotten the moment they became inconvenient to remember. The twins, bless them, were the only honest ones in the house, At 8 years old, they had no filter, no social pretenses to maintain. "Grandma Nora, why don't you live in your own house?" Luke asked as I braided his soccer cleats. "This is my house, sweetheart," I said gently. "But Daddy says it's his house now, and you just help take care of it because you're old and don't have anywhere else to go." The words cut deep, not because they came from a child, but because they revealed what Andrew had been telling his sons about me. In their innocent minds, I wasn't their grandmother who loved them. I was a charity case their parents had taken in out of pity. "Daddy says lots of things," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Sometimes adults don't tell the whole truth." That afternoon, while the boys napped and the house fell into its usual quiet routine, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my lawyer. "Nora, wonderful to hear from you," said Patricia Young, the family attorney who'd handled Gerald's estate. "How are you settling in with Andrew and Matilda?" "Actually, Patricia, that's what I'm calling about. I need to understand something about Gerald's will. Andrew claims the house belongs to him now." There was a pause. "Well, technically, he inherited the property, but you have a life estate. That means you have the right to live there for the rest of your life. He can't force you out, Nora. Did he tell you otherwise?" "He suggested it would be better for everyone if I found somewhere else to live." Patricia's voice sharpened. "That's his opinion, not his legal right. You own that house as much as he does until the day you die. Don't let anyone tell you differently." After hanging up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. Andrew had lied to me, tried to manipulate me into giving up my rights. The dutiful mother in me might have been hurt by this betrayal. The woman I was becoming felt only cold satisfaction. If my son wanted to play games, I was about to show him how they were really won. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. 3 days later, Matilda announced they were hosting another dinner party, this time for Andrew's birthday, which I'd somehow forgotten was approaching. The guest list would be smaller, but more exclusive. Senior partners from his firm, Matilda's book club friends, and a few neighbors from the country club set. "We'll need the full treatment," Matilda said, scrolling through her phone as she gave me my orders. "Cocktail hour, seated dinner, and dessert. I'm thinking something elegant, you know, the kind of thing that shows we have sophisticated taste." "Of course," I said, already planning. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I ordered flowers, planned the menu, and transformed the house into a showcase worthy of Architectural Digest. Matilda took credit for everything, of course, posting photos on social media of the dinner party planning that consisted entirely of pointing at arrangements I'd made and nodding approvingly. The night of the party, I outdid myself. The table setting was perfection. My grandmother's china, crystal glasses that caught the candlelight, silver that gleamed like mirrors. The menu was ambitious. Beef Wellington, roasted vegetables with herbs from my garden, a chocolate soufflé that required precise timing. Everything that would impress Andrew's colleagues and reinforce his image as a man who had everything under control. I wore my best black dress. Not designer like Matilda's wardrobe, but well cut and appropriate. I'd done my hair and makeup carefully, wanting to look like the lady of the house I actually was, not the hired help I'd been relegated to playing. The guests arrived at 7 sharp. I recognized several faces from the previous party, including Joseph Harrison, who nodded at me with that same knowing expression. The others were new, more senior partners, their wives dripping in jewelry and designer clothes, the kind of people who saw wealth as a natural state rather than something to be earned. I served cocktails in the living room, moving efficiently between guests, refilling glasses and offering canapés. The conversation flowed around me as if I were invisible. Stock tips, vacation plans, complaints about their children's expensive private schools. These people lived in a bubble so complete they couldn't see beyond their own reflected prosperity. "Andrew, you must give me the name of your caterer," gushed Mrs. Wellington, the wife of another partner. "These hors d'oeuvres are incredible." Andrew beamed, accepting the compliment as if he'd prepared them himself. "Oh, we have our secrets." He caught my eye across the room and winked, as if we were sharing some private joke, as if I were complicit in his deception. That's when Joseph Harrison approached me near the kitchen doorway. Mrs. Franklin, he said quietly, I have to ask, are you by any chance the same Nora Franklin who used to run Franklin and Associates? The question hit me like lightning. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. Franklin and Associates, the consulting firm I'd built from nothing, the business that had made Gerald and me wealthy enough to buy this house, to send our children to private schools, to live the life Andrew now took for granted. Yes, I stammered. That was a long time ago. Not so long, Harrison said, his eyes sharp with interest. 15 years, maybe? I remember when you sold to Brennan Corp. Brilliant exit strategy. You walked away with what, 30 million? The number hung in the air between us. 32 million, actually. But who was counting? Money I'd invested wisely. Money that had grown substantially over the years. Money that Andrew knew nothing about because I'd kept my finances private after Gerald's death. I'm sorry, Harrison continued, but I have to ask, what are you doing serving drinks at your son's dinner party? Before I could answer, Andrew appeared beside us, slightly flushed from wine and success. Mr. Harrison, I hope you're enjoying yourself. The food is incredible, isn't it? Indeed it is, Harrison replied, his tone carefully neutral. I was just speaking with Mrs. Franklin about her former business. Andrew's smile faltered slightly. Oh, Mom's little consulting thing? That was years ago. Ancient history. $32 million isn't exactly ancient history, Harrison said quietly. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Andrew's face went white, then red, then white again. Around us, conversations continued, but I could feel the shift in atmosphere, the way power dynamics were suddenly rearranging themselves. I'm sorry, what? Andrew managed. Harrison looked between us, clearly realizing he'd stumbled into something complicated. Your mother built one of the most successful consulting firms in the region. When she sold it, she walked away with enough money to retire comfortably for several lifetimes. Andrew turned to look at me, his expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. For the first time in years, he was seeing me not as the faded woman who cleaned his house, but as someone with resources, with options, with power he'd never imagined. Mom? He said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt absolutely nothing. No love, no anger, no disappointment. Just a cold, calculating assessment of a man who had systematically destroyed every bond between us through his own greed and cruelty. We'll talk later, I said calmly, then turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Behind me, I could hear Harrison's voice, carefully controlled but audible to anyone listening. Andrew, I think there might be some things about your family that you don't fully understand. The evening was about to become very interesting indeed. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands steady as I put the finishing touches on the beef Wellington. Through the serving window, I could see Andrew huddled with Harrison, their conversation intense and hushed. Matilda had noticed the tension and was making her way over, her smile bright, but her eyes sharp with the predatory instincts of someone who sensed opportunity or threat. The dining room buzzed with anticipation as guests took their seats. I'd arranged the seating carefully, Harrison at Andrew's right hand, Matilda holding court at the opposite end. I served each course with mechanical precision, invisible again now that the moment of revelation had passed. But I could feel eyes on me, whispered conversations that stopped when I approached tables, the electric undercurrent of gossip beginning to flow. Nora, dear, Mrs. Wellington called out as I refilled her wine glass. Joseph was telling us the most fascinating story about a consulting firm. Didn't you used to work in that field? The question was loaded with false sweetness, the tone wealthy women used when they were fishing for information they could later weaponize at country club lunches. I did, I replied simply, not elaborating. How exciting! What kind of consulting? Before I could answer, Andrew's voice cut across the table, loud enough for everyone to hear. His face was flushed with wine and embarrassment, his voice carrying that particular edge men get when they feel their authority being questioned. Oh, Mom had a little business helping small companies with their operations. Nothing too sophisticated, mostly filing systems and basic organization stuff. She was always good with housework. The dismissal was so casual, so complete, that several guests exchanged glances. Harrison's expression darkened, but he said nothing. I felt every conversation in the room pause, waiting to see how I would respond to being reduced to a filing clerk at my own dinner table. I smiled and continued pouring wine. "How nice that you remember," I said mildly. But Andrew wasn't finished. The wine had loosened his tongue, and perhaps Harrison's earlier questions had rattled him more than I'd realized. He seemed determined to reassert control over the narrative, to put me back in the box where he needed me to stay. "Actually," he continued, his voice getting louder, "since we're all being so honest tonight, I should probably clarify something about our household arrangements." Matilda's face went pale. She knew Andrew well enough to recognize when he was about to say something catastrophically stupid. "Andrew," she warned quietly, but he waved her off. No, it's fine. These are friends." He gestured expansively around the table. "The thing is, Mom doesn't actually live here in the traditional sense. We took her in after Dad died because, well, she didn't have anywhere else to go. It's more of a caregiving situation." The silence that followed was deafening. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Wine glasses froze in midair. I could practically hear the social calculations being made. Who was lying? Who was deluded? What was the real story behind this increasingly bizarre dinner party? Harrison cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, Andrew, but I think there might be some confusion." "No confusion at all," Andrew interrupted, emboldened by what he mistook for support. "Mom helps around the house. She's actually quite good at it. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. We let her stay because, well, what else was she going to do at her age? It works out for everyone." He paused, then delivered the words that would seal his fate. "Think of her as our housekeeper. We let her stay out of pity. She's good with a mop." The words hit the room like a physical slap. Mrs. Wellington gasped audibly. Two of the other wives looked horrified. The men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing cruelty even when it was dressed up as honesty. But Andrew wasn't done. Drunk on wine and what he imagined was his own cleverness, he turned to Harrison with a conspiratorial grin. "I mean, Mr. Harrison, you understand how it is with elderly relatives. Sometimes you have to be creative about managing their expectations. Mom's got some interesting ideas about her past accomplishments, but we've learned it's easier to just let her have her little fantasies." The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Harrison set down his wine glass with deliberate care, his face a mask of controlled disgust. "Andrew," he said quietly, "are you absolutely certain that's how you want to characterize your mother?" "Of course. I mean, look at her. Does she look like someone who built a multi-million-dollar company?" Andrew laughed, the sound ugly and harsh in the elegant dining room. "Come on, Mr. Harrison. You of all people should be able to spot the difference between successful business people and, well, domestic help." That's when Harrison's expression shifted from disgust to something much more dangerous. He looked at me standing in the doorway to the kitchen, serving spoons still in my hand, and I saw recognition dawn in his eyes. Not just recognition of who I was, but understanding of what I'd endured, what I'd allowed to happen, and what I was capable of in response. "Actually, Andrew," Harrison said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him senior partner of one of New York's most prestigious law firms, "I know exactly who your mother is. The question is, do you?" He turned to address the entire table, his voice clear and carrying. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Nora Franklin, founder and former CEO of Franklin and Associates, one of the most successful management consulting firms in the Northeast. When she sold her company 15 years ago, the purchase price was $32 million. She employed over 200 people and had clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to federal government agencies. The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Forks clattered against plates. Someone's wine glass tipped over, sending red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. "Mrs. Franklin," Harrison continued, never taking his eyes off Andrew's increasingly horrified face, "revolutionized supply chain management for 3 different industries. She holds 2 patents for organizational software that are still generating royalties today. She's been featured on the cover of Forbes, Harvard Business Review, and Inkeber's magazine. Andrew's face had gone from red to white to green. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "But perhaps most relevant to tonight," Harrison said, his voice gaining strength, "is that Nora Franklin is worth approximately $68 million, making her one of the wealthiest women in Westchester County, wealthy enough to buy and sell this law firm several times over." Matilda made a small, choked sound. Around the table, guests stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to awe to barely concealed calculation. The social dynamics of the evening had just been completely reversed. "Now, Andrew," Harrison continued, his tone conversational but deadly, "would you like to reconsider your characterization of your mother as domestic help who lives here out of pity?" Andrew looked at me, his eyes wide with panic and dawning comprehension. For the first time in years, he was seeing me clearly, not as the broken woman he'd convinced himself I was, but as the force of nature I'd always been. The woman who'd built an empire while he was learning to tie his shoes. The woman who could destroy his career, his marriage, his entire life with a single phone call. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. I walked slowly around the table until I stood directly behind his chair. The room was so quiet I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the soft rustle of expensive fabric as guests leaned forward to catch every word. "Just what, Andrew?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm. "Just lying to your colleagues about who I am? Just telling your children that their grandmother is a charity case? Just trying to convince me to give up my legal rights to my own home?" His shoulders shook. Actual tears were forming in his eyes. Not tears of remorse, but tears of fear. Fear of exposure, fear of consequences, fear of the woman he'd systematically underestimated and abused. "Please," he whispered, so quietly only I could hear. "Please don't do this. Not here, not in front of them." I leaned down until my mouth was next to his ear, close enough that my words would be for him alone. "You want to know what pity looks like, Andrew?" I whispered. "Pity is what I felt for you 5 minutes ago, when I still thought there might be something left of the sun I raised. But pity has its limits, and you just reached mine." I straightened up and addressed the table, my voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm afraid dinner is over." The guests began to murmur, gathering their things with the practiced efficiency of people who recognized a social disaster unfolding. Harrison lingered, catching my eye with a nod of unmistakable respect. As the last guest filed out, I turned to look at Andrew and Matilda, both pale and shaking in their chairs. "We need to talk," I said simply, and for the first time in 2 years, they listened. The house felt different after the last guest left. The same walls, the same furniture, but the power structure had fundamentally shifted. Andrew and Matilda sat at the dining table like defendants awaiting sentencing, while I moved methodically around the room, blowing out candles and stacking plates with the same calm efficiency I'd shown all evening. "Mom, please," Andrew finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" I didn't look up from collecting the crystal glasses. "Explain how you've been stealing from me for 2 years while telling people I'm your charity case. Explain how you've poisoned your own children against me. Or perhaps you'd like to explain how you planned to steal my house by lying about the will." Matilda shifted in her chair, her designer dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared. "Nora, you have to understand our position. Andrew's career. I finally looked at her, and she flinched at what she saw in my eyes. "Yes, let's talk about Andrew's career. The career that was launched with money from my business. The law school tuition I paid, the down payment on his first apartment, the wedding expenses, the country club membership that helped him network into his current position. Should I continue?" That was what parents do," Andrew stammered. "You wanted to help." "I did want to help." Past tense. I set the stack of plates down carefully, each movement precise and controlled. "But helping your child succeed and being exploited by them are 2 very different things. I walked to the built-in bar cart and poured myself a glass of the expensive scotch Gerald had collected. Scotch that Andrew had been drinking freely, never thinking to ask permission. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, settling into the armchair that had been Gerald's favorite. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to start looking for a new place to live. I'm giving you 30 days to find something suitable and move out." "You can't do that," Matilda shot to her feet. "This is our home, the boys' school, our friends, everything is here. This was never your home. It's my home, which I generously allowed you to live in while you were supposedly helping me through my grief. That arrangement is now terminated." Andrew's face crumpled. "Mom, please. If you kick us out, how will it look? My reputation? My standing at the firm?" "Your reputation?" I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. "Andrew, by tomorrow morning, everyone at your firm will know exactly what happened here tonight. Harrison won't keep this to himself. Men like him don't stay silent when they witness something this illuminating." The truth of that statement hit him like a physical blow. His career, which he'd sacrificed our relationship to protect, was already over. The humiliation he'd tried to impose on me had rebounded onto him with devastating force. "There has to be something we can do," Matilda said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Some way to fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them. "Matilda, what exactly do you think needs to be fixed? The fact that you've been living off my generosity while treating me like hired help? The fact that your husband publicly humiliated his own mother to impress his boss? Or the fact that you've spent 2 years planning to steal my home?" She had no answer for that. "Let me make something very clear," I continued, my voice deadly quiet. "I don't forgive. I don't forget. And I don't give second chances to people who mistake my kindness for weakness." Over the next hour, I laid out the new reality with the same methodical precision I'd once used to restructure failing companies. They would leave my house within 30 days. Andrew would resign from his position rather than wait to be fired, because Harrison would make sure he was fired. They would receive no financial assistance from me, no recommendations, no help of any kind. "But the boys," Andrew pleaded. "They're your grandchildren. You can't punish them for our mistakes. The boys you taught to see me as a servant? The boys you told that Grandma Nora was just a sad old woman you'd taken in out of pity?" I shook my head. "No, Andrew. You made your choices about what kind of relationship they would have with me. Now you get to live with the consequences." Matilda tried a different approach. "Nora, you're obviously upset, and you have every right to be. But think about what this will do to your family legacy. Gerald wouldn't have wanted—" "Don't." The word came out like a whip crack. "Don't you dare invoke my husband's name. Gerald would be ashamed of what his son has become. He would be horrified by the way you've treated the woman he loved." I stood up, smoothing down my dress with the same careful attention to detail I'd shown all evening. "This conversation is over. You have 30 days. Use them wisely." As I walked toward the stairs, Andrew called out one last desperate plea. "Mom, what if we apologize? What if we make this right somehow?" I paused at the foot of the staircase and turned back to look at him. This man who had once been my baby, my firstborn, the child I'd dreamed of while Gerald and I planned our future together, the child I'd sacrificed for, worked for, loved unconditionally even when that love wasn't returned. Now I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even disappointment. Just a cold, clinical assessment of a problem that needed to be solved. "Andrew," I said quietly, "there are some things that can't be undone. Some words that can't be taken back. Some betrayals that are too complete for redemption." I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, in my house, bought with my money, and closed the door behind me. For the first time in 2 years, I locked it. The next morning, I woke before dawn and made my first phone call to Patricia Chen, my lawyer. The second call went to my financial advisor. The third to a private investigator I'd used occasionally for business purposes back in my consulting days. By the time Andrew and Matilda came downstairs, still shell-shocked from the previous evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of legal documents. "What's all this?" Matilda asked warily. "Insurance," I replied. "Andrew, I've had Patricia research your employment contract. Apparently, there's a morality clause about behavior that reflects poorly on the firm. Interesting reading? Andrew went pale. You wouldn't. I also had a fascinating conversation with my investigator about your financial situation. Did you know it's possible to trace every penny you've spent in the last 2 years? Every dinner charged to the credit cards I co-signed for. Every vacation paid for with the allowance I provided. Every designer dress bought with money you claimed was for household expenses. Matilda's face went white. That's legal. You gave us access to those accounts. I gave you access for household expenses and emergencies, not for maintaining a lifestyle you couldn't afford on your own salaries. I sipped my coffee calmly. Fraud is such an ugly word, don't you think? You're bluffing, Andrew said, but his voice shook. I slid a folder across the table. Credit card statements, bank records, receipts. $23,000 in the last 6 months alone, spent on everything from spa treatments to golf club memberships. All documented, all traceable, all legally questionable given the terms of our arrangement. They stared at the documents like they were venomous snakes. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice businesslike. You're going to leave my house quietly and without drama. You're not going to contact the media, you're not going to badmouth me to anyone, and you're not going to use my grandchildren as emotional leverage. In return, I won't pursue legal action for fraud, and I won't make sure these documents find their way to the Bar Association's Ethics Committee. And if we don't agree? Matilda asked, though we all knew she already knew the answer. I smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever worn. Then you'll discover exactly how ruthless a successful businesswoman can be when she decides to destroy someone completely. Andrew looked at his wife, then back at me. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've had 2 years to think about it, Andrew. 2 years of being treated like a servant in my own home while you planned to steal it from me. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you honestly believe I was the helpless old woman you pretended I was? He had no answer for that. Neither of them did. 29 days, I said, gathering up the documents. I suggest you start packing. As I walked out of the kitchen, I heard Matilda begin to cry. Soft, desperate sobs that might have moved me once upon a time, when I still believed family bonds were sacred and love could overcome any betrayal. But that woman was gone, and the woman who had taken her place felt only satisfaction at the sound of her daughter-in-law's tears. 3 weeks later, I stood in my living room watching the moving truck pull away from the circular drive. Andrew and Matilda's departure had been as efficient and emotionless as I'd demanded. No dramatic scenes, no last-minute pleas for forgiveness, no touching farewells with the grandchildren they'd turned against me. Just boxes, furniture, and the hollow sound of a house finally returning to its rightful owner. The boys had cried, of course. 8-year-olds don't understand the complex dynamics of adult betrayal. They only knew their grandmother had suddenly become a stranger who didn't want them around anymore. Andrew had tried to use their tears as a final manipulation, suggesting I was punishing innocent children for their parents' mistakes. I felt nothing watching those tears. Nothing but cold satisfaction that Andrew was finally experiencing what it felt like to lose something precious because of his own choices. The house felt different now, cleaner. The oppressive weight of resentment and exploitation had lifted, leaving behind only space and possibility. I walked through each room methodically, reclaiming territories that had been occupied by people who saw me as an inconvenience to be managed. In Andrew's former office, I found a stack of papers he'd forgotten in his haste to leave. Medical bills, insurance forms, financial statements. The detritus of a life lived beyond one's means. At the bottom of the pile was a letter from his law firm, dated 3 days ago. I opened it without hesitation. Privacy was a courtesy I no longer extended to people who had violated mine so completely. Dear Mr. Franklin, it began, following recent events and their impact on firm morale and client confidence, we regret to inform you that your position with Harrison, Wells & Associates has been terminated effective immediately. Perfect. Harrison had moved even faster than I'd anticipated. My phone rang as I was burning the letter in the fireplace. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Franklin? This is Janet Sullivan from Channel 7 News. We've heard some interesting rumors about a dinner party incident involving Andrew Franklin, and we'd love to get your side of the story. I smiled into the phone. I'm sorry, but I don't give interviews. However, you might want to speak with Joseph Harrison from Harrison Wells and Associates. I believe he has some very interesting perspectives on professional ethics and family values. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into Gerald's favorite chair. The local news would run the story. They always did when it involved wealthy families destroying themselves in public. By tomorrow, everyone in Westchester County would know exactly what kind of man Andrew Franklin really was. The irony was exquisite. Andrew had been so concerned about his professional reputation, so careful to maintain the image of success and respectability. Now his name would be synonymous with cruelty and ingratitude. The very people he'd tried to impress would cross the street to avoid him. Over the following days, I received a series of phone calls that confirmed everything was proceeding exactly as I'd planned. Patricia Chen called to inform me that Andrew had hired a lawyer to contest my decision to evict them, but had dropped the case after reviewing the evidence of their financial misconduct. My financial advisor called to report unusual activity on accounts Andrew had access to. Desperate attempts to withdraw funds that no longer existed because I'd quietly closed those accounts the morning after the dinner party. The private investigator had the most interesting update. They've moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Mount Vernon, he reported. Public school district, no doorman, street parking only. Mrs. Franklin is working part-time at a boutique downtown. Mr. Franklin is still unemployed. Apparently, word has gotten around about what happened at that dinner party. And the children? Enrolled at the local elementary school. From what I can observe, they're having trouble adjusting to the change in circumstances. I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, then crushed it ruthlessly. Those children were learning valuable lessons about consequences and the real world. Lessons their parents should have taught them years ago. Thank you for the update, I said. I won't be needing your services anymore. A month after they left, Matilda called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Nora, please, she said without preamble, her voice thick with tears. The boys are asking about you. They don't understand why Grandma doesn't want to see them anymore. Luke's having nightmares, and Levi's grades are suffering. They think they did something wrong. They did do something wrong, I replied calmly. They learned to see me as less than human. They learned that disrespect has no consequences. Now they're learning that it does. They're children. They don't deserve this. No, they don't. But they got it anyway, because their parents chose to sacrifice their relationship with me for temporary convenience. Actions have consequences, Matilda. This is what consequences look like. She sobbed into the phone. Andrew's been trying to find work, but everyone knows what happened. No firm will hire him. We're struggling just to pay rent. The boys had to leave all their friends behind, and they blame themselves. Andrew should have thought about that before he called me a charity case in front of his boss. You should have thought about that before you spent 2 years treating me like hired help. Please, Nora, I'm begging you. If not for us, then for the boys. They're innocent in all this. I considered her words for a moment, then dismissed them. Innocence is a luxury, Matilda. Your boys are learning that early. Consider it a gift. I hung up on her sobs and immediately blocked their number. 6 months later, I ran into Mrs. Wellington at the grocery store. She approached me with the careful deference wealthy people show to those who've proven themselves more powerful than expected. Nora, how lovely to see you. I've been meaning to call. We're organizing a charity luncheon for the Children's Hospital, and we'd be honored if you'd consider joining our committee. The same woman who'd tittered behind her fan at Andrew's attempts to humiliate me now wanted to bask in my reflected glory. The same social circle that had watched my public degradation now competed for my attention and approval. How thoughtful, I replied. I'll have my assistant send you a check. I'm afraid I'm too busy to attend committee meetings. I had no assistant, but Mrs. Wellington didn't need to know that. The suggestion that I had people to handle such mundane social obligations only enhanced my mystique. As I drove home through the tree-lined streets of my exclusive neighborhood, I reflected on the completeness of my victory. Andrew and Matilda had lost everything: their home, their social standing, their financial security, their children's respect. They were learning to live on love alone, and discovering that love without resources is a cold and hungry companion. Meanwhile, I had my house back, my dignity restored, and my reputation as someone not to be crossed firmly established. The phone calls from old business contacts had started again. Invitations to exclusive events arrived daily. People who'd forgotten Nora Franklin existed were suddenly eager to renew their acquaintance with someone who could buy and sell them without thinking twice. I pulled into my circular drive and sat for a moment, looking at the house Gerald and I had chosen together 30 years ago. The roses were blooming again, deep red petals that caught the evening light like droplets of blood. Beautiful and dangerous, just like justice served cold. Inside, I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it in a silent toast to the portrait of Gerald hanging above the fireplace. They learned, my love, I said aloud. They finally learned what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. The house was quiet around me. Not the oppressive quiet of resentment and exploitation, but the peaceful quiet of a space that belonged entirely to me. No ungrateful children demanding explanations for their consequences. No grandchildren who'd been taught to see me as less than human. No daughter-in-law calculating how much of my wealth she could claim. Just me, my victory, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the universe does deliver perfect justice. Some people might call what I did cruel. They might say that family should forgive, that love should triumph over pride, that grandmothers should put their grandchildren's needs above their own dignity. Those people have never been called a charity case by their own son. They've never had their life's work dismissed as filing and basic organization. But they've never watched their grandchildren learn to see them as servants rather than family. They've never learned the cold, clear truth that some betrayals are too complete for redemption. I have learned that truth, and I am better for it. Stronger. Freer. Finally. Completely. Myself again. And if Andrew and Matilda and their boys have learned that actions have consequences, that respect must be earned and maintained, that cruelty comes with a price tag they can't afford, well, then perhaps something good has come of this after all. Not redemption, not forgiveness, not healing. Just perfect, inevitable, satisfying justice. The way it should be. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from.